Breeze Block. Presenting June 25, 1950, a date that would soon be etched into the annals of history. Dawn broke over the Korean peninsula, a land scarred by occupation, divided by ideology, and teetering on the brink of war. The morning sun cast long shadows over a nation that had endured decades of turmoil and strife. For 5 years since the end of World War II, Korea had been a geographical chess piece in the larger game of Cold War politics. The peninsula, once a unified entity, was now a battleground for the world's superpowers, each vying for influence and control. The 38th parallel, a line hastily drawn on a map, cleaved the nation in two. This arbitrary division created a physical and ideological barrier that would soon erupt into open conflict. The North, under the iron-fisted rule of Kim Il-sung, aligned itself with the communist doctrines of the Soviet Union and China. Kim Il-sung, a leader with grand ambitions, sought to expand his influence and consolidate power. Kim Il-sung, a fervent nationalist and communist, harbored dreams of uniting the peninsula under his banner. His vision was one of a Korea free from foreign influence, a Korea that stood strong and united under his leadership. In the South, a fledgling democracy struggled to take root under the leadership of Syngman Rhee. Rhee, a staunch anti-communist, faced the daunting task of building a new nation from the ashes of colonial rule and war. Backed by the United States, South Korea grappled with political instability and economic hardship. The American presence was both a stabilizing force and a source of tension as the South sought to establish its own identity and governance. The uneasy truce between these two diametrically opposed regimes was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The border, heavily fortified and patrolled, was a constant reminder of the fragile peace that hung by a thread. That spark came in the pre-dawn hours of June 25th. As the first light of day began to break, the quiet was shattered by the sounds of mobilization and preparation for an imminent assault. As the world slept, Kim Il-sung unleashed his forces in a surprise attack across the 38th parallel. The North Korean army, well prepared and determined, moved swiftly and decisively, catching the South off guard. The Korean War, a conflict that would claim millions of lives and reshape the geopolitical landscape, had begun. This war would not only devastate the Korean peninsula, but also draw in nations from around the globe, each with their own stakes and interests in the outcome. The North Korean People's Army, battle-hardened and well-equipped by Soviet benefactors, surged across the border in a torrent of steel and fire. This was no mere skirmish, it was a full-scale invasion, meticulously planned and executed with precision. The soldiers, driven by a fervent ideology and bolstered by advanced weaponry, moved with an unstoppable force. Their initial target, Seoul, the capital of South Korea. The city, a bustling hub of activity in the heart of the nation, was now in the crosshairs of the advancing forces. The North Korean troops, with their eyes set on a swift victory, pushed forward relentlessly. Caught off guard, the South Korean army, still in its infancy, was ill-prepared for the ferocity of the assault. The soldiers, many of whom were barely out of training, faced a seasoned and well-coordinated enemy. Panic and confusion spread through the ranks as they struggled to mount a defense. The KPA, spearheaded by Soviet-made T-34 tanks, made rapid progress. These tanks, symbols of Soviet engineering prowess, plowed through defenses with ease. Their presence on the battlefield was a game-changer, providing the North Koreans with a significant tactical advantage. Seoul, woefully undefended, fell within days. The city's fall was a devastating blow to South Korea, both strategically and psychologically. The streets, once filled with the sounds of daily life, now echoed with the rumble of tanks and the footsteps of occupying forces. The South Korean government, along with what remained of their military, was forced into a desperate retreat southwards. The exodus was chaotic, with officials and soldiers alike scrambling to escape the advancing enemy. The sense of urgency and desperation was palpable. The speed and brutality of the invasion shocked the world. Headlines screamed of the sudden and violent conflict, and images of terrified civilians and devastated landscapes filled newspapers and broadcasts. The international community watched in horror as the situation unfolded. The United States, caught off guard by this blatant act of communist aggression, scrambled to respond. Military units were hastily mobilized, and crisis meetings were held to formulate a strategy. The urgency of the situation demanded swift and decisive action. President Harry Truman, fearing the fall of South Korea would embolden communist movements elsewhere, vowed to aid the beleaguered nation. In a solemn address to the nation, he outlined the stakes and the necessity of intervention. American troops, answering the call, began boarding ships bound for the Korean peninsula. The United Nations, in an unprecedented show of unity, condemned the North Korean invasion and authorized the formation of a multinational force to repel the aggressors. Representatives from around the world came together, setting aside differences to confront a common threat. The stage was set for a conflict that would draw in superpowers and test the resolve of the free world. Soldiers from various nations, united under a single cause, marched in unison, ready to face the challenges ahead. The Korean War had begun, and its outcome would shape the course of history. As the situation in Korea deteriorated, one man's name rose to prominence in the halls of power: General Douglas MacArthur. A World War II hero, MacArthur was a figure of immense stature and unwavering self-belief. Appointed commander of the United Nations forces, MacArthur brought with him a reputation for audacity and a strategic brilliance that bordered on the reckless. MacArthur, assessing the dire situation on the Korean peninsula, conceived a daring counter-offensive. His plan, an amphibious landing at Inchon, a strategic port city well behind enemy lines. The Inchon landing, if successful, would cut off the KPA's supply lines and force them into a chaotic retreat. It was a gamble, a bold stroke that many in the U.S. military considered far too risky. Inchon's harbor, with its treacherous tides and narrow channel, presented a logistical nightmare. Yet MacArthur, confident in his abilities, convinced a hesitant Truman to approve the operation. Section 4. The Chinese Enigma. Warnings ignored. As MacArthur prepared for his audacious gamble at Inchon, a new threat loomed on the horizon: the People's Republic of China. Mao Zedong, China's communist leader, had watched the unfolding conflict with growing alarm. A staunch ally of North Korea, Mao viewed the presence of UN forces, particularly those of the United States, as a direct threat to China's security. Through diplomatic channels, China delivered a stark warning to the United States. Push the North Koreans too far north, they cautioned, and China would be forced to intervene. MacArthur, however, dismissed these warnings as empty threats. Blinded by his own confidence and convinced of China's reluctance to engage in a larger conflict, MacArthur pressed on with his offensive. He saw the Korean War as an opportunity to not only repel communist aggression, but to deliver a decisive blow to communism in Asia. Section 5. The Dragon Strikes. China enters the fray. The Korean War, a conflict that had already seen dramatic shifts in momentum, was about to take another unexpected turn. On September 15, 1950, MacArthur's gamble at Inchon paid off. The meticulously planned amphibious assault was a high-stakes maneuver that aimed to cut off North Korean supply lines and relieve pressure on the Pusan perimeter. The UN forces, spearheaded by the USAX Corps, stormed ashore and secured the vital port city. This bold move caught the North Korean People's Army, or KPA, completely by surprise. The KPA, caught completely off guard, was thrown into disarray. Their lines crumbled, and what had seemed like an unstoppable advance was now a chaotic retreat. The landing at Inchon was a military triumph, a testament to MacArthur's strategic genius. It showcased his ability to think outside the box and execute complex operations with precision. It reversed the tide of the war and sent the North Korean forces reeling back towards the 38th parallel. The momentum had shifted dramatically in favor of the United Nations forces. However, MacArthur's triumph was short-lived. The initial euphoria of victory soon gave way to a new set of challenges. As UN forces crossed the 38th parallel and pushed deep into North Korea, they stumbled into a hornet's nest. The deeper they advanced, the more they underestimated the looming threat. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops, under the banner of the People's Volunteer Army, poured across the Yalu River, marking China's official entry into the Korean War. This was a game-changer. The PVA, underestimated and initially undetected by UN intelligence, launched a series of surprise attacks. These ambushes were meticulously planned and executed with precision, catching the UN forces off guard. They were ill-equipped compared to their American adversaries, lacking tanks and air support. Their weaponry was basic, and their logistical support was minimal. But they were a formidable fighting force, fueled by nationalist zeal and a willingness to fight to the death. Their determination and sheer numbers made them a force to be reckoned with, altering the course of the war once again. The harsh Korean winter added to the challenges faced by both sides. Chinese soldiers, often poorly clothed and underfed, endured extreme conditions, yet their resolve never wavered. The UN forces had to quickly adapt to this new reality. Strategic meetings were held, and plans were redrawn to counter the unexpected Chinese intervention. The battles that followed were intense and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The entry of China into the war marked a significant turning point, reshaping the conflict and its eventual outcome. The Korean War, often referred to as the Forgotten War, was now a global conflict with far-reaching implications. The bravery and sacrifices of those who fought in this war continue to be remembered and honored to this day. Section 6. Retreat from the Yalu, a turning tide. The Chinese intervention caught MacArthur and his forces completely unprepared. The UN offensive, which had been progressing so well just weeks earlier, ground to a halt. The PVA, utilizing guerrilla tactics and exploiting the harsh winter conditions, inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing UN troops. What followed was one of the most harrowing retreats in American military history. UN forces, outmaneuvered and facing overwhelming numbers, were forced to withdraw in disarray. The retreat from the Chosin Reservoir in particular became a symbol of the brutality of the Korean War. MacArthur's dream of a swift and decisive victory lay in tatters. The war had entered a new, more dangerous phase. China's entry had fundamentally altered the strategic calculus and dashed any hopes of a quick resolution to the conflict. Thank you for watching the movie. I'd love to click on the subscription and click